So this video is going to be a relatively new experience for me in this channel. This is the first time I'm going to be producing some content in conjunction with a number of other people within the community. 10 for 12 is the brainchild of the Lawn Gnome, and I will have a link for his channel in the description below. He does this series each month where he takes a topic and, gives like a top 10 or just a 10 of kind of list. Will occasionally reach out to other content creators to get them involved as well. For the month of May, and the topic of favorite authors who write series, he has reached out to myself and 10 other people within the community to participate. This will literally be a 10 for 12, as in there is going to be 12 of us doing this. With that in mind, I would like to formally offer my sincerest thanks for the invitation to be involved in this to Mr. Gnome. I want to try and take this a little differently. The rules are quite open. If you're a fan of the author for something else they've written and didn't actually read their series, they still count because this is recommending the author themselves. So bear in mind when you're watching this, some of these recommendations are going to be strictly on the strength of the author itself and not a glowing recommendation for the series that they may or may not be known for, because that's certainly the truth in my case. There's going to be a number of authors on my list here who write series that I may or may not have read or finished, but strictly on the strength of the author themselves and on some work that I've read by them, I'm recommending them as an author. And thankfully, because there are so many people involved in this particular kind of collaborative effort, I'm going to try and stay to my own strength, my own niche. I'm going to see if I can populate this with at least mostly indie authors, or at least small press, because seeing the other tubers that have agreed to be a part of this, I know that some of my favorite bigger authors are definitely going to be already represented in their videos. The only one that I want to add right now, but not necessarily part of my top 10, is just to get it out of the way, because I know a few of you who know this channel very well will be expecting it. Yes, Jake Bible technically should be on this list. The man writes a novel a month and has a number of series that I enjoy, so this is going to be a 10 for 12 from me of indie and small press mainly. That doesn't include Jake Bible. It's kind of just a given. So without any further ado, no more preamble, let's get into my 10 for 12 favorite authors who write or has written a series. I want to preface this as well to make it clear that this is not a top 10 for me. There's no way that I'd be able to arrange these authors in order of popularity or really any other defining way. A lot of them are so different from each other that this isn't a top 10, this is just a list of 10 authors I would like to drop a spotlight on right now. The first author I want to talk about is one that you probably haven't heard of, and I know how hipster douchebaggy that may sound, but I say it because he's a local author here in St. John's, Newfoundland. The author I'm referring to is Scott Bartlett. Scott is an indie published author here in Newfoundland. What makes him unique as an indie is that for a number of years he was actually a full-time writer on the strength of his paperback sales at trade shows, which if you talk to any indie author working in the fields right now, you will find out that's actually a very, very rare occurrence in this day and age. Scott is in the midst of two different series right now. One, the Out of Dodge series, which is a science fiction-esque satirical series. The second series is Exen Prophecies, the first book being Supercarrier. Both of these series have 2 books of the 3 already for sale, and although I haven't read Supercarrier yet, I do intend to do that soon. Scott also has a medieval comedy that he wrote as his first real published novel, and another novel called Taking Stock, which deals a bit with mental illness. The Percy Jane First Novel Award that I won last year, actually, I learned about it because Taking Stock won that award previously, and I saw it listed on the cover, so that's how I found out about that award in the first place. So basically, no matter what happens from here on out, Scott's going to have a decent amount of influence historically on the beginnings of my career as a writer, so I would be remiss to not mention him here in this video. The second author I'd like to mention is one that I've mentioned on the channel before for a subscriber giveaway earlier in the year, and that is Paul E. Cooley. Paul is a bit of a hybrid author. The titles that he's mainly known for you would find through Severed Press, which is a small press, which is the Black series. The first book takes place on an oil rig where they basically dig too deep and this like monstrous kind of sentient oil monster thing kind of wreaks havoc on the oil derrick. And since then, that series has gone on to be 3 books long, and there's a 4th one coming down the pipe. Most recently, he's found success with the Derelict saga, and this is a science fiction suspenseful horror title. Basically, if you are a video game fan and you have played Dead Space and you're a fan of that, Derelict is probably a title you're going to want to pick up. The second book is completed and already submitted to Severed Press and will probably be up within the next month or 2. Paul is a child of the horror genre, so needless to say, it's something that I would naturally lean towards. But the further he gets along his career, the more he branches out, the more he is revealing himself to be more versatile than to just be pigeonholed into the horror genre. Realistically, going into a Paul Cooley novel, I expect there's going to be some gore and there's going to be some very unpleasant things happening to the characters. That's just how he does things. If I was being completely honest with myself and not restricting my selections here to indie and small press authors, then Jim Butcher would definitely be one of the 10 authors I would want to bring up, since the Dresden Files is one of my favorite series. However, luckily for me, the indie world has offered a number of alternatives that I can use in his stead. The most prominent of which I will mention is Craig Schaefer. Craig Schaefer is the author of the Daniel Faust novels. The Daniel Faust series is an urban fantasy series where we follow our main character, Daniel Faust, who is a sorcerer for hire. He's a lot like Dresden, except that he's kind of like the flip side of the coin. Faust is actually not a hero. He's a bit of an anti-hero. He's a former gangster. He uses black magic. And this is one of those series where although he is morally ambiguous, he's usually going after or looking into or investigating people who are far worse than himself. Basically, he's Harry Dresden if Dresden developed a bit more of a bite. The Daniel Faust series is entirely indie published, but since then got the attention of Amazon and I believe 47 North, who now publishes the Harmony Black series, which is a spin-off series from the Faust saga. If you're a fan of Dresden, looking at you, Aaron, and desperately waiting for the next novel to come out, then dipping your toes into the Daniel Faust series may be the thing you're looking for to tide you over. The next author I'm going to talk about, I am almost certain is an indie, but if not, she's at least small press, and it's Cristie Stratos. Cristie is the author of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, which is the first book in her Dark Victoriana collection. I'm not sure if this really counts for this topic, because at the time of recording there's only one book available, but Cristie is very active on YouTube and other social media, so I am aware that she has actually finished a draft of the second book in the series, Lock and Key. She does have a lot of shorter works published in other locations. You can find that on her own website, or check her out on YouTube or Twitter or any social media platform. Like I said, she's very active there. I'm not going to go too much into the story of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart because it's one of those stories where I think the less you know going into it, the better. So with that, I leave you with a recommendation to check out Cristie. I'm just going to leave it at that. This might piss off any Newfoundlander watching this video, but I was going through Indigo one day, and across the local intersection, I come across this cover. This is the cover for Hollow Hour by Caighlan Smith. She's a local author here in Newfoundland, born right here in St. John's, who wrote this in high school. It's book 1 of her 4-book Surreality series. And considering I'm looking at this cover next to an endless stream of icebergs, fishing boats, our former premier Danny Williams, and other very staple Newfoundland traditional kind of imagery, this really stuck out to me. So of course it caught my eye and I picked it up. It is evident that she was in high school when she wrote this, I will admit that. The genre, I would probably put it between middle grade and YA. It almost feels like a middle grade story, but unless I'm out of touch with what middle grade is these days, it strikes me as a little more mature than that. But it's a post-apocalyptic world where you have practically children, like young teenagers, known as hunters, and they fight ghosts with this green liquid type substance called plasma. They make gauntlets out of it, they make like firearms, they cover it over blades, and they use that to fight ghosts. midway through the first book, you meet this character named Ty, who kind of really subverts all the understanding of how this world actually operates and what the hunters actually achieve. Beyond that, I'm just going to leave it up to you. If you want to check out the story, I'd recommend checking it out. Like I said, it's not life-changing fiction, and it is, and in the case of Hollow Hour, it's clear that it is a debut novel, but it's still very well done. It's still very entertaining, and if the premise sounds like it's something that would interest you, I'd imagine you would have a fun time reading it. So once again, showing my support for the local talent of the island, I recommend checking out Caighlan Smith. From there, this brings us to an author that I mentioned before, actually in the same video as Paul Cooley, and this author is Terry Mixon. He writes actually in a number of genres. His strength is space opera. He is the other co-host of the Dead Robot Society podcast along with Paul, and the reason why I would count him among my favorite authors is his transparency with his career. If you join the Facebook group, the listeners of the Dead Robot Society, Terry will post basically his entire Amazon report each month or every other month of his sales, of what he did differently, what promotions he ran, the breakdown of each individual book. So I mean, there's so much information he offers about his own indie writing career. He's been an incredible inspiration for me to, again, really take this seriously. He writes the Empire Bones Saga, which is an ongoing space opera about this. It's kind of gotten to a bit of an extreme point now because we're about 5 or 6 books deep, but initially it takes place in this quadrant of space. A ship with the princess, I guess, of the Empire was lost in this other portion of the universe, and that universe is where the old Terran Empire used to be, and that has fallen like centuries and generations ago, hence Empire of Bones. But he also has other series. He has released a post-apocalyptic novel. He has a book called Storm Divers, which is kind of sci-fi extreme sports. It's literally kind of like skydiving, but in Jupiter's red spot. So it's a bit absurd, and he also has a Humanity Unlimited series, starting with the book Liberty Station. That's another sci-fi space opera. His production and his success is enviable. Again, I would not be able to have a list of favorite franchise authors without mentioning Mr. Mixon as well. Continuing with another dead robot, basically, I'm going to talk about Scott Roche. Scott Roche is the first Patreon account that I've ever contributed to. I actually contributed at the highest amount when I first started, but then money got tight, so I'm down to like I think $1 or $2 a month. But I am still a contributor to Scott's Patreon. He is an author, he is a podcaster, he gives free audio fiction away for his patrons. He is someone that I got to know as one of the hosts of the Dead Robot Society before they trimmed it down to a 2-man show late last year. Scott is the author of 2 series that I'm familiar with. Is the Casebook of Esho St. Clair, which I believe to be a very Lovecraft-inspired mystery series. And his other book, the one I'm more familiar with, is Ginny Dare. And don't judge by the covers. It's a fine YA kind of space opera. Again, like Caighlan Smith, it may venture a bit into the middle grade round, but if I had to put one, I would say it's a YA title. It's just as you would expect, a space opera. I don't know how else really to describe it. It's Ginny Dare, her crew, and they go on adventures. It's actually been so long since I read Crimson Sands that I don't remember a whole lot. It was one of the first books I read from a Dead Robots author, but I do remember enough to know that I enjoyed it. Scott also released an anthology called The House of Phobos. It's a collection of his short stories, and all of them were tied to a specific phobia. Also, for those of you looking for some diverse reads, Scott, as far as I know, is bisexual, and he recently written a book called Coming Home Again. It's a fairly short novel. It's a sci-fi romance with LBGT kind of elements, so it's kind of difficult to put to words, but if it's enough to get your interest, as with everyone else, I will have their website listed down below. You can check them out from there. And to round out the Dead Robots influence over this video, I would like to talk about Mr. Justin R. Macumber. Justin Macumber is the author of the Born of Fire series, as well as the Gallows Investigation series. He has a number of other books out there as well, but those are the two franchises, I guess, that would make him qualify for this particular video. Born of Fire series includes right now a Minor Magic and a Broken Magic, and I believe right now he's working on the final book in the trilogy. I think it's entitled A Killing Magic, but I may be wrong. It's an urban fantasy. A young girl named Skylar basically finds out at a young age she has magic. I'm not going to go into much more detail than that, but it's all about, you know, discovering your power and finding where it comes from and learning how to deal with this kind of thing. It sounds very coming of age, and it is, but I assure you there's more to the story than just that. And the other series, which is the one that's more dear to my heart, is the Gallows Investigation series. It starts off with Stillwater, and the sequel Fragile came out not too long ago. It's his most recent release. This follows the young protagonist Maya Gallows. In Stillwater, she investigates the small town where things are not quite as they seem. Once again, I don't want to go too much into details of this, but it's a lot of ancient kind of horror. It's one of those stories where it's more of what you don't see, and it's more about suspense and atmosphere than it is actual but gore or jump scares and things like this. The spillover into the sequel was really good. I actually had the privilege of beta reading the sequel to it, Fragile, and found that was a great read as well. So, I mean, if any of this even sounds remotely interesting, I'll have his website below for anybody who's interested in finding out some more about it. I would definitely recommend you do so, but then again, if it's in this video, that's needless to say, I'm sure. Throughout the course of this video, it's very difficult for me not to just run through the backlog of Rocking Self-Publishing podcast episodes and just grabbing pretty much 10 authors at random and calling them my favorite authors, because a lot of them are inspirational. So I've restricted it to just one author that I found through that podcast. So allow me to introduce you to, well, actually not introduce you to, he's actually successful enough that you may have actually heard of him. The next author I'm going to talk about is J.A. Cipriano. I discovered him, as I said, on the Rocking Self-Publishing podcast, which is the same podcast that introduced me to BookTube to begin with. So this is kind of going full circle. To sit here and tell you all of his series would be, in and of itself, an hour-long video. At the time I discovered him, he was on the podcast talking about the success of his Thrice Cursed Mage series. Just browsing through his Amazon, he has the Found Magic series, he has the Half Demon Warlock series, the World of Roll series, Elements of Wrath series, Witching on a Starship series, Kingdom of Heaven, which is book 1, came out last week, so that's a new series. The guy writes a lot. It's funny because the advice that he kind of gave on the podcast that I discovered him is the kind of advice that really pisses off all of those people out there who say, you know what, you should always write the story you want to write first and worry about selling it later. Because J.A. wrote a lot of books and was not, like, they were well written, but not very well received. They were overly complicated, subverting basically every possible trope you could think of. Anyway, it didn't resonate with the crowd. Then he wrote his Thrice Cursed Mage book, the first one called Cursed, in which he kind of just looked at the urban fantasy market, saw what was selling, and threw a bunch of tropes together. And he says this unapologetically. The Thrice Cursed Mage took off. A couple of the series that I mentioned, like World of Rule, Elements of Wrath, claim to be lit RPG novels, so it looks like he's venturing into that genre of storytelling, which is fascinating in and of itself. He writes really exciting and fast-paced urban fantasy, and looks like lit RPG, which, from what I can see in the reviews, look like it's going quite successfully as well. I honestly think that if urban fantasy is your thing, even though I haven't read a lot of the titles that I'm seeing here on this page, I'd recommend at least go check out his Amazon author page, which will be linked below, and see if anything catches your eye, because I really feel like I want to binge a lot of these stories. But anyway, yeah, J.A. Cipriano. The last author I'm going to talk about is going to be a bit of a cheat, because I'm going to name off 3 authors, but it still fits, it kind of fits. And that's going to be Sean Platt, David Wright, and Johnny B. Truant. Collectively, we know them as the Self-Publishing Podcast hosts. They are the founders of Sterling & Stone, their own self-publishing imprint. It's still indie publishing, but they have a corporate kind of entity that makes it have this legitimacy feel to it. These are also the guys that are the creators of the Smarter Artist Summit. They have the Smarter Artist Podcast, which opens up with the greatest line of "The starving artist is dead, long live the smarter artist." And it's the kind of mentality that I've tried to uphold in my own kind of pursuits of this career, which is why, again, it gets me so upset and aggravated when I hear the advice of, just write to the muse and don't worry about the business side. If you're doing that, I don't want to hear complaints of why you're not a success monetarily or sales wise, or how hard it is to be a professional author. They are the authors of the Invasion series, Yesterday's Gone, The Beam. There's so many to name that, again, I'll just link Sterling & Stone's website below and you can check it out. They released their stories as serialized episodes that came out every other week until they had a full quote-unquote season done. Then they released them as a box set. Their podcast is full of invaluable information, so if you're listening to this and you're a writer or an aspiring author, then you probably already know about them, but if not, check out the self-publishing podcasts, and while you're at it, check out the Rocking self-publishing podcast. 2 different sources of information that are very useful in understanding the industry at large. But anyway, that's my final pick for the 10 favorite franchise authors, the Sterling and Stone guys. And that brings us to the end. Once again, I do want to thank Steve, the Lawn Gnome, for including me in this very ambitious collaboration. I'm pretty sure he said this is actually the biggest one he's attempted so far for his 10 for 12 series, and this is very much like him as a person. This whole idea is more about bringing people together, showing that this community can be a place where everybody can just come together and talk about the things they like and be a force of positivity in the community. Steve himself, I don't really consider to be a quote-unquote booktuber. As it's been said before, he does book content, movie content, pop content, the Funko type, not the culture. And if you are among the, I'm sure, minority of people watching this video that are already subscribed to my channel, go check out Steve's. You can also go check out the other 10 booktubers that he reached out to for this collaboration. Those links will also be down in the description below. Anyway, that's it for me. See you guys next time. Cheers.